They say your shadow is proof you exist, an obedient companion that mirrors every movement, a silent twin stitched to the ground. But imagine for a moment that it refuses to follow. Imagine turning a corner and finding the familiar dark outline lingering behind you instead of matching your steps, or watching it detach entirely, moving with a will of its own. What would you make of a world in which shadows misbehave? For centuries, shadows have carried meaning. Plato used them as metaphor shadows on the cave wall, reflections of a dimmer reality. Artists have chased them for depth and drama. In folklore and myth, a shadow was more than a silhouette. It was a piece of the soul, a currency in bargains with witches and spirits. To lose one's shadow was to lose part of oneself. That ancient unease persists because shadows touch something fundamental. They are literal evidence of light meeting matter, but they also map our relationship with the unseen. Physically, a shadow is simply the absence of light. When an object blocks photons, it creates a region of lower illumination, the shadow. Complexity enters when multiple light sources, refracting surfaces, or transparent materials intervene. In everyday life, we accept slight displacements. On a cloudy day, a shadow diffuses. At sunrise, it stretches. Under streetlights, it fragments. But those are predictable behaviors governed by optics. So when a shadow seems to act independently, our instincts rush to explanations, ones that mix science, psychology, and a touch of superstition. First, consider environmental causes. Reflections and secondary light sources can create the illusion that a shadow is not attached. The glossy pavement ahead might throw back a faint mirror image. A spotlight from a passing car can produce overlapping shadows that confuse perception. In the presence of fog or dust, light scatters, and what we interpret as a shadow may be an area where light is slightly diminished, not a precise silhouette at all. In other words, the world is full of visual tricks that can convince us our shade has gone rogue. Then there are neurological explanations. Our brains are prediction machines. They constantly anticipate the sensory consequences of our movements. This predictive coding allows us to move smoothly and react quickly. When visual input contradicts expectation, when a shadow lags, shifts, or separates, our brain flags an anomaly. In rare cases, neurological disorders can alter perception so fundamentally that familiar things, including one's own reflection or shadow, appear foreign or misaligned. Phantom limb syndrome, certain forms of visual agnosia, and dissociative conditions teach us that perception is fragile. A shadow that stops following could be a symptom, a misfiring in the circuitry that binds action to visual feedback. Culturally, the image of a defiant shadow has long served as a narrative device. In literature and film, a shadow that refuses to conform signals otherness. A hint that a character harbors a secret is under a curse, or is stepping outside the boundaries of reality. Peter Pan lost his shadow and had to stitch it back on. In horror, shadows that behave independently are harbingers of malevolent forces. Why do these stories resonate? Because they externalize a private fear. What if some part of us has agency we no longer control? There is also a quieter, more philosophical angle. Shadows mark our dependence on external conditions, on light, on perspective, on the presence of others to define contours. A shadow that breaks away forces us to confront autonomy and identity. If a shadow chooses a path different from its source, does that represent liberation, betrayal, or simply the emergence of complexity? We can read it as an allegory for parts of ourselves that evolve separately from our will. Habits, memories, instincts that trail and sometimes overtake us. In the end, the phenomenon of a shadow that stops following is rarely supernatural in the literal sense. Physics, optics, and neurology account for most sightings. Yet the persistence of the image in our stories and dreams points to a deeper truth. Shadows are not just visual artifacts. They are psychological and cultural mirrors. When they misbehave, we are confronted by uncertainty, by aspects of perception and identity that defy tidy explanation. So the next time your shadow hesitates, pause and observe. Check the light, consider the reflections, listen to the sensations that rise. Whether the cause is refracted photons or a mind playing tricks, the experience is an invitation to reflect on how closely we think we are bound to the world. and on the curious, sometimes disquieting fact that parts of ourselves may already be walking different paths.